Welcome to Perspectives in Peds, or PIP for short, your go-to podcast for insights into paediatric practice. From clinical approaches and emerging research to the everyday wins and challenges, we bring you OT perspectives that inform, inspire, and spark conversation. Welcome back to Pipcast. Mikyla, Caitie.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me. We are up to part 3 of feeding Mealtimes.
Yes.
The first installment, Mikyla's been on part 1 and 2. So
Yes.
along for the journey.
Some bite-sized pieces.
Yes. But we're going to be doing a lot of puns, I believe, today.
She's a big foodie, this one.
I am a foodie.
But part 1 was around where to start, or our thoughts around what we might start with when we're supporting families working on Mealtimes goals. And then last time you sat down with Jackie and you discussed assessment and part of some of the intervention. But today I wanted to talk more about where do we see feeding going when it leaves the therapy room. So starting to explore what kinds of things we think about in school environments, in the home and the community that might actually have influence on us making success or gains towards feeding and Mealtimes goals. Cool?
Amazing. Like
Beautiful.
transferring it outside.
Yeah. When was sort of, or what kind of comes to mind when you think about that feeding doesn't actually just stop in the therapy room for you guys?
Probably like the social side, or thinking that outside of the therapy room, yes, they might practice in our setting and see success, but then they have to then go and replicate that to so many other environments. And I would say, setting in a clinic isn't easy to replicate. So
Yeah.
it's like, how do you transfer that and keep the success going?
Yeah. And I think like when you think about mealtimes or feeding or eating or food in general, it's just everywhere within a client's life. Like our whole like social ecosystem kind of revolves around food, doesn't it? So really thinking about, well, how does that impact across their day, and what supports need to be in place across the day to enable a client to actually engage in that as well.
We often think about that, excuse me, with feeding, but also things like toileting. It's like we've got these things that we're working on that are tricky, but the human body needs to do that thing multiple times a day as well, particularly when we think about kids where anxiety or fear comes into it as well. It's like, imagine having to be exposed to the thing that you are fearful of so many times in your daily routine as well.
Yeah, or even those kids that can eat in a therapy room or at home when they're eating by themselves.
Yeah.
And then they experience challenges at school or when they're around their peers and eating. So
Restaurants, all of that.
yeah.
You mentioned, Caitie, that like the social side of feeding is something that we might think about. And I think that that is a huge part that as clinicians, particularly as OTs, because we think so holistically beyond the therapy doors and into the child's universe, that feeding and Mealtimes is so deeply social. And typically if you think about any kind of like social event, there's always a component of feeding or food, or often social outings as adults revolve around food as well. So when we've got our kids that are working on Mealtimes goals and they're going to school and there are structured meal times, or they're going to birthday parties or to school camps and that kind of thing, I suppose, like, how do we work as clinicians to take these things into considerations? Like if we're working with a teacher, for example, what kinds of things might you think about when trying to transfer feeding work from the therapy room into those environments?
Yeah, I think it's thinking about what that mealtime actually looks like in that specific environment. So I know when I go into schools, like I actually find it quite interesting how teachers kind of and schools set up their meal times and how they actually talk about food. I know I hear a lot, we're having brain food now, you can only have fruit. Or, before like lunch, you've got 10 minutes to eat your food.
10
which
minutes is not enough.
Yeah, it's not a long time. And when you think about it, like there's so many, I guess, rules in place for kids around mealtimes and eating in the school environment. Whereas if you think about the workplace, like when do you ever get told you need to eat your lunch within 10 minutes? Or
It's a really good
do
perspective.
you know what? You can only have fruit at this specific time.
Yeah.
Like, it just does not happen. So I think really starting with, well, what does it actually look like for this child in this particular context? So, for example, at school, and then thinking about, well, how might those environmental components or the rules in place actually impact your client within that setting?
And usually the goal, like in that case, is not for the child to eat within the 10 minutes. Like it's actually, it's either we make accommodations or they don't eat at all is usually the option there. So it's more around like finding strategies that the school can get on board with that will support that.
I think too, like thinking about the perspectives and values of the people that surround the child, because someone might, for example, find that if a child doesn't eat in a certain setting, or even like eat the food that's being provided to them, it could potentially come across as rude. Depending on who you're around. And if that's grandma and they're going to grandma's every day in the school holidays, like that, we need to know that information and find out what their values are around food. And same with teachers, like just, I guess, asking those questions out of genuine curiosity, like what do you think about this? And just asking that question, you can get a lot of information around what their expectations actually are.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because food is just there's so much emotion wrapped up in food. And I think we've all obviously been raised in different ways. So we all have these different perceptions of how or different ways of talking about food, whether we're aware of it or not. So I think that's really important. It's even like the way people eat as well. So across different settings, you were talking about grandma's house. So, you know, if a child at home is used to and families put accommodations in place so that they can just use their fingers and hands to eat, whereas at grandma's house that is potentially perceived as rude and, you know, you need to be using cutlery or whatever it might be. So, yeah, I think that's really important, being curious around, well, what do mealtimes look like and what do the different, I guess, stakeholders want mealtimes to look like?
I wonder if it's also about then working with the child around when you're doing goal setting, like what's important to you? Like, is it that you want to be able to, when you go to that party at Bounce and they all go into that room and go and have their lunch or their party food, that you want to be able to have a plate of that food with your friends? Or,
And then also like on the opposite of that, I've had kids tell me like, actually, I don't want to eat the food that's at the party. I'll just eat before I go. And then it's like navigating that as well.
And giving the family scripts. And we were talking about that particularly for like schools and that kind of thing because, yes, everyone's been raised to think about food differently and we might have different thoughts around, you know, if you've got a teacher that's like, well, you can't go outside till you've tried everything in your lunchbox or you can't have your sandwich for recess.
No.
That's your lunchtime
Is it
food
often?
or that kind of thing. And helping as clinicians, helping families work with their teachers to give them scripts or to let them know. I know one of our colleagues purchased this for her daughter when she started school, but there's oh gosh, I think she's a pediatrician or she's a dietitian, Dr. Kyla. And she's got a really great Instagram profile. I'll pop it in the show notes. But she actually sells little lunchbox stickers which communicate like that this lunchbox has been intentionally packed and that
that's really cool.
the child whose lunchbox this is can eat it in whatever order that they
cool.
want.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, really cute.
You'll have to put the
I
the
will.
link
I'll
for
put the
that.
link in there because that's been so helpful for families because that's also the hardest thing I think for a lot of parents and caregivers. They're like, I'm not there at school or at camps or sometimes even birthday parties to help my child in those moments, and that can be a cause of stress for kids. And like alone is just knowing like, what do I say when my teacher says I can't have my sandwich at recess time? And so not knowing that they don't have to have something to say because there's something like that available is really cool. And then, yeah, like camps and that kind of thing, like planning forward, trying to support families to work with, if they can, with the camp.
Yes.
Like, what foods do you offer when you're on camp? And can you take food? And it's just so much further beyond the therapy room, isn't
Yeah,
it?
Yeah.
and childcare is often I've
Yeah.
seen due to allergies and those sort of things, you can't bring your own food
No,
Yes, which is
into
really
the
true.
I'm not allowed to
environment.
take any or give any food to my girls where
Yep.
they go. They've got a chef and they've got, a big um like rule around specific ingredients and that kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, but it is quite funny because then I see the menu and I'm like, there is no way my children are eating that. They won't eat that if I give it to them. But even then, it sounds like they, at least at my girls' childcare, they get a lot of choice and control around. I'll see what's on the menu. I'll be like, oh, what'd you have for lunch? And they'll be like, rice and sauce. And I'm
Yeah.
like, they didn't have the curry or the
Yeah.
pasta or that kind of thing. So there's no expectation of like, you have to eat
Mm.
exactly what's put in front of you. Yeah. When you're thinking about working with parents and supporting them to then like, I guess like work with teachers or whoever, or, extended family members or that kind of thing, like where does coaching fit into that when you're working on feeding for you guys?
I think coaching really helps with that like reflection
Mhm.
of what things are looking like right now, and potentially where families, clients and anyone else who's involved, where they want it to look like in the future.
Mm.
And also, well, okay, it's looking like this now. We want it to look like this. What do we think are the steps in between?
Yeah.
So I think it really helps to like reflect
Yeah.
on what's going on and what they want to change as well.
Mm.
I think almost to build their capacity to be able to advocate for their child,
Mm.
because we might almost like, I don't want to say do it once, but model what that might look like in terms of advocacy, but then
Mm.
upskilling the parent or the caregiver to be able to do that then for every teacher, which might actually happen. Like
Yeah,
as they
yeah.
go through the different year levels,
Yep.
they might have to have the same conversation
Mm.
each year. So
Yep.
instead of relying on us to do it, actually upskilling them to be able to have those conversations
Yeah.
in lots of different settings.
Yeah.
Or feeling confident to be able to actually say something to that extended family member when they're like, they have to eat their dinner, or I put so much love into this meal for you, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like for those, and it's usually putting them in a box, but grandparents are, really good at this.
Yeah.
So often it's your client's parent that is needing to kind of have a word with their parent.
Yes.
Which then blurs that line of like, well, I'm your parent. You don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard. So I think parent coaching is a beautiful way to support families to build their, like you said, the advocacy skills, but the confidence to say it in a way that is like well-intended and not there to offend the receiver or
And
anything
productive,
like that.
I guess,
Yeah.
would be a good word for it.
Yeah, I like that. I was also thinking as well around like when I've worked on feeding goals in the past, I've really liked using coaching to support families or parents to reflect on how they were raised around
Yes.
food and what kind of uh, like perspectives they put on their child inadvertently. I always reflect that I didn't touch a mushroom until I was like probably 25,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yep.
because I just always thought mushrooms were like quote unquote disgusting.
Yes.
I still don't
because-
touch them, to be honest.
Well, it's because my mum doesn't like mushrooms.
Yep.
Yeah,
And she's
interesting.
always had a real like, oh, mushrooms, like don't want
Yeah.
it. So I just
Brussels
assumed,
sprouts. It's like you don't like
Yeah.
them. Like,
Yeah.
I think coaching as well can really help families in also setting just right expectations as
that,
well,
yeah.
or just right challenges, I
Yep.
guess, and actually like rethinking, oh well, why is that my initial goal? Should that be my goal? Like why are we aiming for that? Like what's the importance of it? What's the
Yeah.
purpose of it
Yeah.
as well?
And being given permission to sometimes just like do less as well.
Yes.
yes.
Like I had one client and she was really just trying to like build up his mum was trying to build up his diet, I guess. He was very restricted in what he would eat. And I was just like, well, if we really think about the steps to eating, like I don't need him to be actually trying these foods. Let's just try looking at that hot dog across the room on his sister's plate. And
Yeah.
she's like,
Yep.
what? Is that intervention? Like, am I allowed to do
Yes.
that? Like, yeah, you don't have to have that screaming fight every night because you're trying to get him to try that food. But sometimes coaching is the only way to give them that explicit
Yes.
permission to do that. Something else that we think about is I guess the cultural and diversity lens around food, and how we can support families to work towards food goals while still being curious and sensitive to their families' food practices that may be more related to their cultural background. Have you guys got any examples of clients that you've worked with in the past or that kind of thing where that's had to really like be at the forefront of your mind and not imposing kind of our, I guess, like Western expectations around what mealtimes look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I had a situation with a client, and I think you nailed it when you said being curious, because I think that's the most important thing here. But I had a client who was from an Indian sort of background, and he had particular sensory preferences. Sorry, about liking his food separate, so each of the individual food items separate and not touching the other items.
Yeah.
And a lot of his family's meals were based around like curries and things where, all the food was touching. You had the bread in the curry as well. So it was supporting, I guess, the family to think about like I guess and to get curious themselves around, well, what are their expectations, and what are their family's sort of cultural expectations in terms of food, and then also advocating for that client at the same time while still really being respectful of their, cultural background and how they traditionally serve and eat food.
Yeah.
So I think it can also be like, it can at times be difficult to sort of navigate that as well,
Yeah.
particularly when there's a bit of a mismatch between maybe the cultural traditions and a child's sort of preferences or needs as
and
well.
that's what I was thinking. It's not necessarily about like when we're leaning into that curiosity. It's not necessarily about going, tell me about what food practices look like in your family. And then we take your child and need to work towards a goal to be able to fit into that box. But that's where coaching might come in around, like similarly, I had a client of Sri Lankan background and they ate a lot of their food with their hands and with bread and rice and that kind of thing. But their child showed really strong preference from a sensory perspective of not touching food with his hands. And so I could completely appreciate where mum and dad were coming from around that's what we do. That's how we eat the foods that we eat, but then also educating them around why that's tricky for their child and it's not necessarily a choice for their child.
Yeah.
What about you, Mickey?
I had someone, a little young boy, and when they brought in food to do feeding practice, I actually didn't know what the food was. So it was, I guess, a good opportunity for me to listen and learn and find out what was actually in that food, because then we wanted to be able to pull foods that were in that meal and find out, well, does he eat them in other foods, and find out more about that. But it was definitely more about listening and asking about what that was, rather than just assuming, or I guess looking at other foods on that plate that I knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, leaning into that, I think.
Yeah, that curiosity piece is really like pivotal there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
When we think about feeding goals, I mean, as OTs, we're always setting goals with some kind of intended outcome, I guess. And I guess outcomes can look really different for each individual child. And Caitie, you were talking about a client earlier, and we thought it would be a good one to kind of reflect on in terms of how the social side of things came into feeding goals for that child, but also what was the actual goal and how might that look different compared to what you might like assume a feeding goal to be?
Yeah, so this was actually not one of my clients, but another clinician. I was supporting them with, developing a therapy plan and things for this particular client. And basically, it was a teenager. And there was a bit of a query around potential eating disorders. So the OT was working alongside a psychologist and other members of health professionals. But basically, the client sort of identified that it was really difficult to eat at lunchtime in front of peers. So there was a lot of sort of anxiety around eating in front of peers, and they had kind of like restricted themselves to one type of food that they would eat at lunchtime. So the actual goal that was developed was around like coming up with a range of sort of food items that the client would be comfortable sort of eating in front of peers. So it was a really cool kind of therapy plan because it was looking at, okay, well, what are the properties of that particular food that the client likes in terms of, sensory wise, in terms of, does your face kind of get messy when you're eating this type of food? And then looking at, okay, well, if this is on the list, how can we expand it? Are there other foods in the fridge that are potentially a little bit similar?
Yeah.
So it was a really cool sort of goal because it wasn't, yes, it was related to eating at lunchtime, but it was also related to exploring other options that this person would be comfortable eating.
And that sounds really collaborative with that client
Super
as well.
collaborative.
Like it wasn't just a conversation between caregiver and OT around they're just not able to do this, so let's just work towards them doing it. It's actually like, well, what would you feel comfortable with within this?
Yeah.
What about you, Mickey? Have you got any cases that like pop to your mind in terms of when you're thinking about like the social components of feeding or the cultural side of things or the parent coaching side?
Almost on the like contrasting your example, I spoke to someone and their parent was like, I actually don't want them to be able to eat at school, or that's not the priority. And at the moment, they weren't eating at school due to the sounds of other people eating.
Yes.
And based on, I guess, like getting the full picture, it was actually, let's look at building up breakfast because they can already eat breakfast, and also building up dinner and afternoon snacks at this point in time. Whereas if I sort of had maybe seen that on paper without asking those questions, I maybe would have assumed that the goal was to eat at school, but it was actually just something completely different. And it was looking at, okay, well, how can they manage in that situation when their friends are eating and they feel comfortable and not have to be the one to walk away from that social situation because the sounds and sensory experience of that is too demanding.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily that like when we're setting goals or thinking about what success looks like for a lot of our feeding related kids, it's not necessarily just eating a wider range of foods.
No.
What do you think of when you're thinking of goals for kids around feeding?
First, like if someone puts mealtime / feeding on their form, then generally it's I jump to like, oh, it must be picky eating or the amount of food that's being consumed. But I think once you ask a few more questions, a lot of the time it's not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think that question is actually quite tricky to answer because like they can be so individual. So it's really like dependent on the client and their circumstances, I guess.
I even had a teenager and she wouldn't say she's a picky eater, but is celiac. And part of her goals were actually looking at what pre-made meals can she get from like the supermarket that are really low demand, can chuck it in the microwave, no prep, because otherwise it was at the moment too tricky to meal prep and do that.
So it's kind of more EF related, it sounds. Yeah.
But perhaps just wasn't hungry, so wouldn't eat. But they wanted to, just needed to find other options that were available to them. So broad.
It is so broad. And I think being able to really like work with families around like when they say like I want them to be able to do this or eat this, like to feel you have the knowledge to be able to go, why? Like, what
Yeah.
will that allow them to do? Because if we're really thinking from an OT lens, like the participation functional side of things is key. And so, yes, if it's like, well, if they can eat this or they can eat their dinner at the table or they can, whatever it might be, it will allow them to feel more able to go to their friend's house for dinner.
Yeah.
Or,
Even from like an
yeah.
energy perspective, like
Yeah.
that one example where they weren't eating perhaps enough during the day, it started I guess the conversation started because fatigue was a huge factor. And then we looked at sleep and it was like, what else is missing here as a part of the picture? And we ended up landing on that feeding picture.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I'd love to know some tips, I suppose, or practical strategies for clinicians listening for taking feeding and mealtimes therapy practice from the therapy room out into the child's life.
Work with the team or the people, or maybe and the people that are around the child on a day-to-day basis. And perhaps assuming that the caregiver will provide that information to everyone, like what role can we play in supporting to advocate for the client in lots of settings, especially like initially while the parent is learning how to do that themselves.
Yeah.
That would be one.
So you mean like family members,
Yep.
teachers.
Teachers if you
Invite them
can.
to
The whole picture.
sessions.
Yeah, I was going to say if
Video.
there is a particular caregiver outside of the parents that is really present, if you've got a child that goes to grandma or grandpa's every day after school, see if they'd be open to coming to a therapy session.
Yeah.
Or even receiving, like, provided it's okay with the family, receiving session notes and, you know, recommendations.
Video our feeding practice.
Oh, I love that.
Take it and show them what it actually looks like, because you can say, yeah, we're doing feeding with the OT, but what does that actually look like? And
especially now having these conversations, we know that feeding can look so different from client to client.
Yep.
You can't assume you know what that's going to look like.
I think even just like supporting families to share some of the resources, like the key resources. So even, you know, the steps to eating, I think like the amount of times you show families that and they're absolutely mind blown about it. So I can imagine like teachers, grandparents, you know, the people supporting the child would actually be really mind blown about it too.
It's so interesting when you actually think about how many steps there are to digesting a food.
Share Pipcast, our feeding episodes.
Yeah, if they're a clinician, I don't know. Or a teacher. It's good for teachers too.
Yeah. But I also think even like sharing information about the client's progress as well, to be like, this is where we were and this is where we are, and we've got the hope that we want to be somewhere else, but we've also got to meet the child where they're at the moment.
Yeah. I think as well having some like supporting the parent or caregiver to have some really clear scripts
Yep, I love
for when
that.
they're advocating, but also if the client is able to do so themselves, giving them some scripts as well around, you know, what should I say if somebody says, oh, your food smells, or you're not eating your lunch or whatever.
Or why do you eat the same thing every day?
Yes, you've got the same role every single day. I think if kids can feel more confident in knowing how to respond to that, that's also going to be really practical as well.
My last thought is probably deciding on a plan to help families see it through, because it is long, like it is a long-term goal. And I know like sometimes we might work on it and then they're sort of equipped to work on that at home, and then it might, like we might work on another goal, but what does that actually still look like? And I think having a really clear plan that's made with them will help them see it through.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me. I think this will be the last one of our feeding
I've got an appetite
series.
for more.
You've got an appetite for more. She's
That was
back.
great.
But
was
if there
good.
is, I don't know, if you're a listener and you're like, oh, you guys didn't cover this within feeding, let us know. Maybe we do have another episode up our sleeve.
Maybe someone will attend another amazing PD.
Maybe.
We might have
and we'll
some more.
feed back on it. I thought you were going to give me another pun just.
Oh, Sorry.
Anyway,
She's full. She's full.
I was going to say any parting puns, Mikyla. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Before we go, if you are a clinician looking for more support between episodes, KidLink has a range of services designed to build your clinical knowledge and confidence. KidLink Education is home to our on-demand, high-quality professional learning you can apply straight away into your practice. If you want access to monthly PD, group supervision, and our community of like-minded OTs to learn from and connect with, check out OT-Link. We also offer clinical supervision, which is designed to support your growth across professional, clinical, organisational, and personal goals, wherever you are in your career. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit like, subscribe, and follow. It genuinely helps more clinicians find the show, which means a bigger community and more of us doing what we love. Thanks for listening.